um, we're are we on yet?
We're on.
We're on.
Yeah, that's right. There we
I
go.
almost feel like we should be set up like those make money campaigns on PBS, where we should have a phone-in
right,
thing.
telethon.
So yeah, a telethon. Thank you. Because we've sort of just got together just now, and we're trying to think about what we even want to talk about today.
Yeah, well, I've got a starting question.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you're just new joining us to the show, this is episode 15, which they're not sequential, so you can tune in anytime, catch any episode that you want. 15 episodes, we probably got easily more than 20 hours of conversation that we've had, rarely, repeating ourselves or touching on a similar topic. It's been good. If you don't know, this is Blaine Andrusek, a herbal elder. I've been in the community for a long time as a herbalist, as an instructor, wild food forager, guide, expert with essential oils, aromatherapy. A phytotherapist.
When I got that certificate, it scared the crap out of me because I didn't want to be an elder.
Right. Yeah.
I think the first time it came up was a lady at Rona said, "Oh well, you must be a senior now, so you get a discount because it's Tuesday or something. It's like every second Tuesday or whatever you get to." And I didn't know whether to be happy about getting a discount. Or, holy crap, really? I'm a senior now?
Yeah. Time marches on anyways, doesn't it? So, yeah, you just got to embrace. I like getting older personally. Of course, one will long for those previous days, early days when you're younger, but there's so much, amazingness about life. To be grateful, like, all right, we're still here. We made it.
Well, I have to admit that a lot of my best friends over the years are gone. Yeah,
right.
Yeah. Some of it car crashes, some of it overdoses on drugs, some whatever. But, and is just disease.
Yeah. So there's lucky to be alive, and then there's all the wisdom that one gains through the years. Yeah. Hopefully, one has a bit of wisdom. Which
it's almost become like a mantra for me to just say is what is.
Right.
Like I've had to go through so much change in the last 2 years, and so if I find myself whining about something, I just pause. Is what is. Just be happy you're here. And
totally, it's a very Buddhist perspective. As it is, yata bhuta, which is as it is. It is what it is. Exactly, and being happy and content with that, because you can't change it. It's a good mantra. It is what it is. So, yeah, okay. So before, drive over, and then we're kind of sitting down, and we got into music. And, both Blaine and I are drummers. This is a tabla. This is from my travels back in India years and years and years and years ago. Still got them. Still play them every once in a while. And so we share not only commonality of a love of plants and herbalism, but also music. And so here's the question. Let's see what you can pull out from this one. What connections do you see between music and herbalism, if any? Either in your approach or what you've received from them, learned from them. I don't know. It's a big...
That's pretty odd, Malcolm. I got to think about that for a while.
Yeah, and of course your other passion was photography. Maybe we can pull that in, but yeah, music and herbs.
Well, in terms of, do you usually play just one of those at a time, or do you play them like the guy on the screen? Do you work
you play them both. Yeah.
Two at a time?
So just for those, This is the second one, so this is kind of the bass drum, and then you have that high one, and it's do-do-do-do-do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Much like I just had bongos and congas.
Yeah, high and a low, yeah.
And
there's some obvious connections, like they're both art forms, that take years of practice and study, right? To be proficient.
And I guess what we're trying to set up with somebody with a health issue is rhythmic in a way.
Right. Yeah.
You know, we've got an approach where
Restoring rhythm, right, and flow.
quite often when I'd see, here we go with that word patient again, client patient, I'd be listening. Maybe I've looked at them from an iridology perspective, and some people would show up with a file this thick for an existing medical condition that's been treated
Right.
standard practice for years, and it worked or it didn't. And sometimes somebody would call me with major endocrine gland problems, and they've taken 35 different drugs, and I would just refer those to one of my naturopath friends rather than even touch it. You know, I had Linda Codnar
Yeah.
in particular was, I hope this wouldn't insult her in saying she practiced for many years and then just one day came to the realization, this isn't what I had in mind. I wanted to help people.
Right.
and so she ended up dropping into becoming more of a herbalist, but using all of her knowledge.
Right.
You know, so.
Oh, sorry, was that transition from naturopath or a pharmacist, or what was she doing and then went to become a herbalist? I remember you telling me one time.
Well, I've got a few different people in that category that went from being
Right.
a pharmacist, to a naturopath. And for them, it's only, I think, 2 years of school.
Right.
Because all of the base training is there with the pharmacy degree.
Right, okay, yeah.
And so the example patient-wise that I used would have gone straight to Linda, because having been a pharmacist, she would have understood this whole long list of meds that the client had been on. Right?
Yeah.
Because it would have just, I wouldn't have known where to go with them. You know, where do I start?
Yeah.
But sometimes it's very easy to look at a client's history and switch them over to herbs.
Yeah.
That's easily done. But different rhythm, or not, you know. So at least when we walked in, I knew they were tabla. Okay?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and that idea of like you could walk into any forest and, you know, like you could have a reasonable way to approach us, like the tablas. Okay, never played these before, but based upon my background, I'm playing, you know, djembe and bongos and all these other things. There's an approach you can take. You can walk into the forest. I recognize that. Must be in the family, or it has this type of smell, or I can taste it. It's got to have these types of actions. You can kind of intuit it your way.
Anything bitter is going to work on the liver,
Right.
sort of thing.
Yeah. These are like universal principles.
And we have the was it the Greeks that had the what the plant looks like?
Oh, doctrine of signatures.
The signatures. Thank you.
Yeah.
So if something looked a lot like a set of lungs, it would probably help your lungs, that sort of thing. Or
Yeah.
if you broke a stem off a herb and the juice comes out and it's a dark yellow color looking like bile, it must be good for the liver.
Right.
And in most cases, that holds up.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, all of the wart things that we have,
Right.
you know, lungwort and liverwort and things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
And cautiously tasting,
Right.
like with mushrooms. I mean, we both know there's only about 5 in Alberta that could actually kill you, but there's probably 500 that would make you wish you were dead for a couple of days because you're in so much cramping pain or extreme pain. I've only poisoned anybody with me or myself a couple of times in my whole career,
Right.
and it was actually because something wasn't right in the book. It was an innocent error,
Right.
where something wasn't quite written right. So on one occasion, it was one of the corals, and I'd had them before, and they were just so outstandingly yummy. Mm-hmm. And so we ate a whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
And in fact, almost all we ate that night was walleye fillets and mushrooms. So we had a lot of both.
Yeah.
And a lot of mushroom people would say, well, the first time you try any new mushroom, you should be very sparing with it and just make sure that it sits well for your tummy.
Yeah.
Because I might eat it and be okay, and you're out there with the runs for 2 days, right?
Yeah.
So we blew that rule, because we overdid it because they were just so yummy. But it was something about the staining that was
right.
written improperly. And of course, my sister-in-law said, "I'll never trust you with wild mushrooms again."
Fair enough.
And it's, you know, I did some intro classes with the city of Calgary a few times years ago, and it started for me with no interest in becoming a mycologist, just that I would do a lot of canoe trips. And in the Boreal forest, it's so rich. Like, you might be on a small island camping for a couple of days, and there's 130 species, you know?
Right.
And I just decided on one trip that I'm never coming back here without a good mushroom book.
Right.
And but I started photographing them. And so when people had asked me about teaching, I was working with slides. I wasn't digital anything until recently, and it was just so interesting with some of them. One that I might have asked you about. I guess it's a type of boletus, but it's chalk white. And it wasn't there when I went to bed, but it was right beside my tent. When I got up in the morning, I almost peed on it. A chalk white fruiting body about this big, and crystal clear, bright red, but crystal clear like jelly,
Right.
almost looking like it was bleeding.
Yeah, it might be a bleeding hydnellum, actually, in that case.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess you do.
Yeah.
And I can't remember whether it was edible or not.
Right. I don't think so. That one could be used for dyeing. People who use it for like that red color to dye.
Yeah, with that juice.
Yeah.
So anyway, after all of the years there's quite a few things in my career where I know more about the herbs and the fungi because I was photographing them.
Right.
Illustrating books, where it was a bit like being a bounty hunter, where I would get a list of plants, whether it was mushrooms or green plants, and it was sort of like a hit list for a book where there'd be 100 species there, and I knew I was getting $25 or $50 or whatever for any one that I could capture,
Right.
and some of them were just not in my range, like there'd be desert plants or whatever. But it allowed me to go camping and actually write the trip off if I had to pay for a campground or whatever, because I was there to photograph the plants. And so in the growing months, I'd be really, really busy out in the field, and then in the winter was when I'd be huddled over a light table, making sure they were all identified properly, and that's where I got on really familiar with all my Latin.
Right.
Because they had to be 100% accurately identified, right? So I'd be in there with a loop and looking at them all. So that's where my careers sort of overlapped with photography and working with a lot of the herbs.
That's neat.
But that whole thing about the signatures, and then I think later, and I'm not sure I ever would have got there without my second wife, Jennifer. She taught me a lot about, and a gal named Diana Ross as well, not the singer, one of my students who became a lifelong friend. And it was those two females that tuned me in on vibrations,
Right.
frequencies, and just, and over the years, I would swear that if you took me to a crystal show and blindfolded me and then held my arm so I didn't break on anything or trip over anybody, if I just went through the whole show like this, I would probably buy about 80% the same crystals that I would with my eyes open.
Right.
Because there might be a box this big of all one crystal, and this is whatever. Hello, you know.
Yeah.
It's like meeting somebody new that becomes a friend in a crowd of people.
Right.
There's just a
totally.
frequency there. Sometimes you click, right?
Yeah.
So, I think for our ancestors, the frequency might have had a lot to do with things as well.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a neat thought. And back to the photography, like I know a lot of herbalists in their training, they might do not necessarily photography, but I think the same objective comes out of it, which is, drawing of the plants. You know, it's part of their study. When you draw it, you really have to pay attention, right? You're like, okay, you know, how are the stems coming out, and what do the leaves look like? And so you obviously got a similar
Yep.
depth of perspective photographing.
I would admit very freely that one good watercolor is better than 10 bad photographs.
Right.
And there's so many different aspects of photographing wildflowers, for example. There might be a coffee table book of Alberta wildflowers, and you turn the page, and there's just this extraordinarily beautiful shot. And I know the plant, so I know that because the sun's just coming up, this guy's getting his ass chewed by mosquitoes right now, standing in a pond.
Right.
But there's a leaf with some water drops on it, and in the mountain, there's a mountain in a dewdrop, and the sun's just coming up. Like, it's strikingly beautiful.
Yeah.
But the leaves are all wrong. Like, it's a flower
Right.
this high coming out of a bunch of leaves this high. And for identification purposes, that photograph is useless.
Right.
It's art,
Yeah.
you know? And then when second wife started teaching, I guess it was flower essence work. And she would go through, I have these files where I might have 30 shots of arnica, and there's a couple that I probably would have thrown away because they were a little blurry in the wind or something. But she'd go, no, that's the one I want, because she was looking for how the shot felt,
Right. Oh, interesting.
as opposed to, I wanted, like you were saying a few minutes ago, I wanted a picture for my classes that was clear, and you could see the leaves very clearly.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing, where, as you were saying, somebody doing a line drawing or watercolors
Yeah.
would have all that detail for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for identification purposes, I would rather have a watercolor book
Right. Interesting.
than a photograph book.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah.
But anyway, we get into the more you know, as sometimes the students are complaining about why do we need to learn Latin and all that sort of thing. And even with teaching essential oils eventually, I would have started out going through the oils alphabetically,
Right.
but I switched that up after a couple of years because I realized that we should actually go with families again,
Right.
because frankincense and myrrh, and one called elemi, are all, I guess that would be cousins in the family, and they have a lot of the same traits.
Right.
So you save a lot of time. Like if I needed some myrrh and didn't have any, the first thing I would go for would be the frankincense. You see?
Right. Yeah.
So, or all the citrus fruits together, because most of their uses are very similar.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, slightly different scents for if you're using them in a perfume or something, I suppose, or a room spray. But yeah, going through them, yeah, family-wise instead of anything to do with the alphabet.
Right. Yeah, no, it makes sense. Okay, so on that note of like kind of learning, studying, you know, like here's how I've drawn a connection between music and herbalism, and it relates to nutrition. It really relates to any kind of art form or discipline, and I learned it, you know, first initially through music, and it was kind of my approach and where I wanted to end up with whatever I was studying. So I didn't get into music till a little bit later, and by that I mean, you know, I wasn't one of these kids that was put in piano school when they're 4 and, you know, all through the grades. Like, that was you?
Yeah.
Was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, my wife was similar to that, like, you know, conservatory piano, you know, go through the grades, very kind of intellectual approach to learning music, reading music off the page, and yeah, produces some great, beautiful results. I was more of the come at it late, you know, interested in rock music, just listening to bands, trying to like figure out, you know, on my drum kit how to play that, jamming with friends. And it wasn't until later with this expectation from parents like, oh, you're going to go to school, you're going to get a good job, to be well paid, you know, this type of thing.
And all we got was classics. Hey? Like if somebody had introduced me to blues,
Right.
I'd probably still be playing piano. But all we
Right.
got was all that classic
Right.
stuff,
The
right?
classical. Yeah. Yeah.
Which for young people is mostly boring,
Right.
other than those intellectual types who would jump in and go all the way
Yeah.
with becoming concert pianists.
So there's, what I identified is there's kind of two different ways one can approach music, and I think the same is with nutrition, which we talked a lot about last week. Same with herbs, but the end goal where I ended up, because I went to music school, I studied jazz, and I love jazz for this reason, that it's, it does embody the complexity, the headiness, the intellectualism of be it time signatures or keys and notes, and just like it's an expression for many virtuosos. They get into it because of the challenge and the complexity and like how heady and intellectual, and yet simultaneous. Like jazz is usually structured like the head, solos, head, and the head kind of gives the framework for the song. It establishes the key, the rhythm, so on and so forth. There's that structure, and then boom, straight into solos, where's that like that spontaneous, like you just let her rip, like you forget all that.
Yeah, even if you're going to see somebody, you might have 3 albums of a performer.
Yeah.
But when you go out and see them live, you know that you're hearing this song in a way that nobody will ever hear it again. Like that, like in jazz in particular.
Totally.
Where a rock and roll band has a stock way of playing that hit. That's the hit song, and it's very little variation, right?
And people want to hear it the same each time, and that's probably why one of my favorite bands is the Grateful Dead. Like I love the kind of the ethos and everything around them. Because as you mentioned, example of a rock band, like no concert was ever the same, right? And it was always an adventure, and it was always kind of that spontaneous expression, tapping into feeling, right? So the ultimate, and that's what I feel is the ultimate end goal is the musician that can embody both worlds. They can play music off of a sheet, like precisely, they understand it, but yet they can kind of forget all that, right? Learn the rules to forget the rules, to maybe an extreme example of that, which I'm not a big fan of, is free jazz, where it's like, it sounds like total noise, but they've taken it to such an intellectual height that you can't even grasp like what is going on within the music. And so nutrition, when we talked a little bit about it last week, just as a segue, there's a real kind of intellectual foundation that one can pursue how to eat through that, like understanding, okay, our macronutrients, our micronutrients, how do they work in the body? And you can really work yourself out of some challenging situations coming at it from that approach. And simultaneously, and this happened to me when I kind of bridged over from learning by ear to try and intellectually understand music, is I kind of lost the heart, I lost the soul of why I love playing. And I would second guess, like, is this right? And we'd have this one instructor, he's like, he taught us how to play one note, just tap right back into, how to play, how to feel music, and don't second guess yourself, don't get too heady about this. And I think, nutrition was a similar approach where I got way too heady about it, and I had to come back to, okay, like, let's just follow my gut, more than all these nutrition trends and intellectualism of...
Well, when we were talking about, this is going back a few episodes, just talking about pickles and how when you're cooking or baking, especially baking, you need to follow a recipe.
Right.
Because it is chemistry, and sauces too, where if you don't have it just right, it's wrong.
Yeah.
But I think you and I are both people that would do a lot of cooking without measuring cups or spoons or anything. It's all a pinch of this and a pinch of that, and you just freehand pour some of that in.
I call it intuitive chefing.
And it's a little different than last month's version.
Right.
But I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're adapting. You're using what you have on hand, what you're in the mood for, what the occasion might call for, the season, that kind of thing. Like it's being in the moment, it's being more adaptable. And so I suppose, how does that relate to herbalism? I think on the one hand, you've got, the folk herbalism, right? That kind of, intuitive sense, learning and approaching plants and herbs from very simplistic, what could seem simplistic, like doctrine of signatures. Like you say, most of the time that's right. Like that's, folk wisdom that you don't need, 10-year degree, at some institution, to walk away with that foundational knowledge, and thank God, we don't need a degree to feed ourselves. We don't need a degree to, help ourselves and heal ourselves with plants. And yet that doesn't negate the benefit of, pursuing it down to the chemistry, knowing your Latin names, getting, fine-tooth combing.
Yes.
Yeah. So herbalism can be that too, that kind of perfect marriage. And whatever side angle you come at it from, the more kind of scientific, intellectual, that can really serve you, as well as, like you said, with the frequency, with the crystals, right? Like the two women in your life that, really brought that element of frequency. And I'm extrapolating more of kind of an intuitive based approach to herbs and to healing.
Well, yeah, and now, I mean, there could just be a bunch of houseplants somewhere, and I could be blindfolded, and you can just scan them, and you're not happy, and
right.
Well, you're really happy. And you got bugs, like you can just
right.
feel it. I guess it's an art or a developed tool that we get to use. But I would always be with a new client. I would always be writing a list of things that I thought would help this person, some of which would be methodologies that wouldn't be from me. I'd be making a referral.
Right.
But I'd be writing a list of things that I thought would help them. And then it would very quickly become, I never liked the approach that some of our fellow practitioners use, where I don't know if they really need the money that badly or what the deal is, but somebody's going to leave their first session with $300 worth of stuff in a bag.
Yeah.
And I would always have a kind of ABC list where we're going to start with this,
right.
which is I'm going to pick the top 2 that I think are probably going to be the best. But if they don't work quite so well, then if you see the person again, well, we're going to shift this up a bit, or the dosage or whatever.
Yeah.
And so.
I always like the approach of working 1 or 2 things at a time as well, because then it's much clearer to know what's working or not, right?
Yeah.
You load someone up with, okay, here's
if you
10 things, $300, like.
And then do you keep using all 10 forever?
Right.
You feel good now. So, but which one did it? You don't know.
No, totally.
Right?
Yeah. Or worse, you get a reaction. Oh, it's not working. We've regressed, or whatever the case is. Yeah. So I think that dynamic is always at play, as it is with music, as well as with herbs. And maybe the biggest teacher of that for me, and there's many people that kind of speak on this topic, is Stephen Buhner. He even, suggests, get to know a plant beyond the book. Right, a lot of us will start with, field guides, herbal books, and it is more that kind of Western clinical, okay, this plant is good for this because of these constituents.
And here's the dosage.
Right? And he challenges that, and he's like, because there's likely there's something else. And I love how you mentioned about, when you meet someone for the first time and you get to know them. I think plants are just like that, right? They're dynamic. They're more than just the few chemical constituents. They're more than just. I always use Denis as an example. Like when you meet Denis, okay, you're going to get a first sense impression of seems like a fun guy, what a character. But there's a lot of depth.
And he's a fun guy that's into fun guys.
Right? But as you get to know him, you're like, oh, he's got a political science degree, he's fluent in French, there's more and more and more and more depth, overall, generally, absolutely. He's a fun guy, he's a real character, those things are still true, but there's more to him. And I think that's the idea of the plants as well. And if we can, meet each plant anew, and even changing in that dynamic, that relationship, plants. Yeah, his point was, it might at times seem counterintuitive, like, oh, I've never read that in the book. Can this plant really do this or offer me that? And his response was yeah, absolutely, be open to it.
Well, like when we have a herb walk or something. We're introducing people to a plant, and so many of them you could literally write a 300-page book about.
Right.
So, we're going to give them the 1-minute version because
totally.
we've only got this afternoon to cover 40 plants or whatever.
Yeah.
And or anything that we do here, I think every episode we've done, when I play it back or just on the way home or anything, what was I not thinking that I didn't bring that up? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because there's just so much to know about the plants. And
yeah, it's what comes up in the moment, what comes through. And I imagine you must have had that as a practitioner. Like you have to rely on, okay, what's coming through in the moment, trusting that what you're saying or the herb that you might be thinking of is right for them.
Where do we start?
Yeah. So, it's this idea of, I suppose, why am I bringing this up? Just to kind of, it's using both faculties, right? Our intellectual abilities, but also kind of our intuitive, what do you want to call that? The brain and the gut, or the right and the left brain, or, however you want to define that, those both elements. And you're right, it is something to develop. And in our kind of modern society, culture, Western culture, like we've kind of elevated the intellect, and kind of, we don't necessarily celebrate the instinct or the intuitive and that side.
Well, back to music, and when I was a stick drummer, maybe this is a cover song, or maybe this is something we wrote ourselves. A friend might be over who's also a drummer and play the same song completely differently.
Right.
I'd never would have thought of using the cymbals that way.
Right.
And that happens with some of the herbs, where I might run into somebody on the street and somebody else is seeing them now, and they're using a herb that I never even thought of using with them.
Right.
There's that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Or how things would build in stages. Like in our band, our virtuoso, I suppose, was his name was Byron, and he was, as an electric guitarist, I mean, if Jimi Hendrix did something new, by the end of the week after hearing it 3 times, Byron could play it twice as fast and backwards, kind of thing. He was just excellent.
Some people just have it.
So most of our own work would start with, he'd have some sort of little riff that he just discovered, and I might be the first one to hear it with him. And, well, how do you feel about this? What do you think of when you play this song or whatever? Because that might start me. I was always the lyricist.
Oh,
so,
you were, eh?
Yeah. So he would be, I'm the poet. So he'd tell me how he felt or whatever, and that would get me thinking about something. Right. But he would then sit with the keyboard player to work out the melody, and I'd be working out. And sometimes, I just couldn't figure out what I wanted to do with my drums. And at one point, I realized I had to learn you can actually do sheet music with drums as well.
Right.
And I had to learn how to do that, because I'd wake up in the morning with one foot hanging over the end of the bed and my hand hanging over the bed rail up here, and I'd be beating something with my foot, with my toes, and then doing something up here with my hands, and realize, that's it. But it's like 2 a.m.
Right.
And if you don't write it down somehow, it's gone, right?
No, totally.
It's gone. It's forever gone in the morning. So I'd have to turn on the lights and get up and write some sheet music. And then I would get together with the bass player.
Right.
So we would work out the bottom end.
Yeah.
And then we'd have a band practice where we would mix that together and start working on the whole song, right?
Right.
So I guess we do that a little bit as practitioners, back to referrals.
Right.
And there's things that, okay, I'm going to handle this part of, like, I just had a chat. There's somebody coming to see me as a visit, former student, and she'd broken out in shingles recently.
Right.
And I said, well, okay, so she did actually have quite a few oils with her, probably from doing courses with me years ago, whatever. I can't remember a face. I'm embarrassed that she's got all this, how excited she is to come and see me, but
Yeah.
I'm not seeing her, you know?
Right. Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's annoying me. So I'm looking forward to seeing her soon. But so what's up and where is it? I said where and what and everything, and I said you might remember that you've had this virus in your body since you were a little girl and had chickenpox, and it's been hiding in some cells, and now you're stressed about something,
Right.
and I've got oils that are antiviral that we can take care of the shingles with, but where is the breakout?
Right.
Because that's another whole side of me as a healer. Oh, it's her right ear and onto her neck a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
So I have to shift gears completely away from thinking about antivirals
Right.
to, okay, first you're sad and you're stressed. So with aromatherapy, I'm going at it from two completely different angles. One of them is antivirals to kill the shingles, to kill the virus. The other angle is she's sad, so we need to make her smile,
Right.
so that stimulates her own immunity.
Yeah.
So she's got some rose. Good. Keep that rose on your nose.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we're going to make we did a blend over the phone, or texting probably, and I said, but where's the breakout? Your ear and down onto your neck. So there's something that on some level you don't want to hear about anymore.
Right.
Somebody else, and it turns out it was an internal, it's something she's talking to herself about,
right.
internal emotions.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I thought it might have been like a man in her life, whether
Right.
that was her father or a boyfriend or whatever, that's at her about something. She's been forced to hear something for too long that she doesn't want to hear.
Yeah.
So we have to deal with that level.
Right.
So we've got 3 different levels going on.
Yeah.
Maybe that's where it
Right.
comes back to music. You know, you got to look at it from
Yeah.
different angles.
Cool. No, that's great. Yeah, and of course, so many ancient traditions do have that. They've mapped out, like the lungs and grief and, liver. There's always that associated emotion, like positive or negative, and nothing is ever
Socrates had his temperaments, they were called.
Right, okay, yeah.
And the Chinese medicine has its, what do they call them there?
Yeah.
I'm forgetting. And then in Ayurvedic medicine, they're called doshas.
Right.
So you're categorized that way.
Yeah.
And we think about how, from the little that I know about how apparently, like in Chinese medicine, if you're born as a female, for example, your father takes on the responsibility, and then if you should marry someone, they take on the responsibility of paying your doctor your whole life, unless you get sick.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, I've heard about this.
It's just a whole different approach.
Right.
So you're paying someone to keep you healthy,
Yeah.
and if they get sick, you're doing something wrong. So you don't pay them anymore.
Right.
Till they get it figured out.
Yeah.
And in Ayurvedic medicine, I guess typically when it's done the old way, the practitioner would have to come and spend at least a full 24-hour day
Right.
with you in your home environment.
Huh.
So that you could see how you interact with your siblings and your parents, and
Right.
you make the food, and
Yeah,
are you
yeah.
having fun making the food, or is that just
Right.
a chore?
Yeah,
And
where-
all of these other factors. right?
Where are you sleeping, like...
Yeah, all of it.
Yeah.
And that just astonished me in terms of
Yeah.
the intelligent level there. That
Well, and contrast that to what we were talking about earlier of just 2 minutes, 4 minutes, maybe you get 24 minutes. That would be rare with a medical doctor, right? Like even a naturopath, like it can, yeah, but 24 hours for sure. And then that reverse incentive, I better get this patient well so I can get paid again, right? Versus the, here, take these and come back for more next week kind of deal.
Well, like in my own case, the expression was prashna parada, which means a crime against wisdom.
Right.
So somehow I was selling so many aromatherapy products, many of which were used for stress,
Right.
but I was backordered to the teeth, up to the nines, sort of, and so I was getting that stressed. Like when I mentioned this to a standard practice doctor at the Foothills Hospital, and we both had a good laugh about that,
Yeah.
that I actually had an anxiety attack because I was committed to delivering so many relaxation products.
Right.
So for me, that became a disease, like,
Yeah.
so all of those different cultures, and then back to, I mentioned that I had just recently heard from somebody that, back to drums, a woman that I'd met, her and her daughter, I think, had done classes with me, and the class I did with her was starting with just raw hides, making one of the native drums, which meant a lot to me, and I still have that.
Right.
And again, played two different ways. You can be banging on that thing as part of a. I remember having to ask some of my and I got clearance from her. Like right now, in writing, I was told that I should not be ever using the word First Nation or Native friends, that I can only say Indigenous.
Right.
And it came up over lunch yesterday that, well, that's just stupid, like you're my Native friend, and
Right.
and she was really up, and it's just this whole,
Right.
well, we don't want to get into wokeism, but it's sort of like if I call a person with black skin a nigga, then that's racist.
Yeah.
But if a nigga calls another black-skinned person a nigger, that's just normal. They can do it.
Right.
But it's kind of weird. But anyway, back to, that's way out on the edge there. Back to knowing that you never have all the answers, therefore the referral process.
Right.
And the whole principle of, we call what we do a practice, because we're never done learning.
Totally. No, I love that.
Every
Yeah.
time I see you, I learn something new.
Yeah.
And
In so many classes that I teach, I always bring that up. Like you gave me that reminder, just like, this is a practice. You're a practitioner because you're practicing, not because you know it all and you've got it all figured out.
or there'll be a particular herb that you forgot about.
Right.
It was a very important herb in your practice
Yeah.
for years, and somehow something else drew your attention, and you started using this new herb a lot more and forgot all about the old one.
Yeah.
And then somebody twigs your mind about it again,
Right.
and that's why there's just no end to it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a big, encourager of everyone being their own herbalist. Well, how do you be your own herbalist? You practice. You practice on yourself first and foremost. If you want to practice on others, okay, maybe have a little bit of schooling, training, like
Take classes, read
take some
books.
classes, yeah. But first and foremost, be your own herbalist. Starts with you, and you do it just by practicing. You practice, making yourself
Why
a tea.
am I sick today?
Right.
How come this thing was going around the office, and Bob and Sharon and Sandy didn't get sick, but I did?
Right.
Or the other way around. Why
Yeah.
aren't I sick? They're all sick.
Yeah.
How come I'm feeling sick? What am I doing to stay well?
Yeah.
And celebrate yourself.
Right.
Give yourself a pat on the back, right?
Totally. Okay, so on the music analogy, here's another thread I want to pull on. You've got more experience doing, blends and formulas and that type of thing. And this relates to when you had mentioned, the virtuoso guy or the bass player, like one of you would start with an idea and you'd ask them, okay, how do you feel? Every herb, just like every note or every even, scale, how we put those notes together can invoke a certain feeling. Like citrus tends to be more kind of bright and happy. How do you come at, formulations? And leading in, like there's probably a chemical thought process.
Yeah.
Okay, this
Yeah,
combination, but
you're
there's
right.
also that kind of like feeling in the notes and. Yeah.
So it's both, and back to why, on one hand, I don't even like the word aromatherapy.
Yeah.
Because, most of my practicing with oils is more like standard practice medicine, where I'm treating an infection, and I'm using this particular oil, and I don't care what it smells like.
Right.
But for just about all of them, oils come from so many different plants that, you need something to relax or you need an antifungal or whatever, I'm going to present you with at least 3, as opposed to saying, use this.
Right.
I'm saying, how do you feel about these?
Right.
And letting you smell 3 or 4 of them. And then the next one's, oh, that's kind of nice. And then you get this, oh, and people will literally just, you can't have this tester back, because
Right.
they're instantly in love.
Yeah,
So there's always, I think, that element of choice. And at times when I'm creating a blend that's going to go on the open market, where I'm just going to choose a whole bunch of, let's say, antivirals, but then we get back to, because I had to go a long way in my courses to justify, part of me hated the whole concept of calling them notes.
Right.
They're not like a piano board. Like, why are they called notes?
Right.
It's part of me wants to say that's just silly.
Yeah.
Because I want to categorize them chemically. That's my left brain.
Right.
But I got to thinking about how, like music, things can either be harmonious and in tune,
Yeah.
or not. I'm trying to remember the opposite for harmony. Cacophony.
Yeah. Cacophony,
right? It's just noise.
discordant. Yeah.
And so, or mixing colors.
Right. Yeah.
Like I always found it fascinating with working with paints, that you can take solid paints and end up with a perfect gray,
Right.
a light gray, and depending on what sort of materials you're working with, even white.
Yeah.
You can take 3 things together. Well, with working with lights, for sure, you can take a red, blue, and green light, and if they're just the right frequency, you can put them all together on the wall, and you've got white light again.
Right.
Okay, so people would get confused about, they'd think, okay, well, I need something, working with color therapy, I need something for my heart. And the first person might say, well, you need something, a bright, vibrant green. And then there'd be this argument that, no, you want something that's sort of a fuchsia magenta color.
Right.
They're both right.
Yeah.
Because if you took both of those, projected them on a screen, combined, they're one light, back to the source.
Right.
And so there's so many ways you can go at it, right?
Yeah. Composition, right?
Yeah.
That's a thread. Composing.
So I'd pick a whole bunch of oils that I knew had antiviral properties, and then go back to, because the whole notes thing is actually perfume theory.
Oh, okay.
And I get people calling me and saying, Blaine, I'm just about through this arthritis blend, but what should I use for a base note?
Right.
And I just hate that, because I think it's not a song, it's an arthritis blend. You don't necessarily need a base note at all.
Yeah.
That's perfume theory.
Right. Or, another area that shows up is like, culinary wise, right? It's like, okay, if you're trying to create the perfect dressing, like, okay, where's that base note, right? In terms of something a little bit more like deeper, fattier. Where's that like high notes, like the citrus, the vinegar, salt, maybe more kind of a low type of thing. And you're trying to fill in that spectrum so the palate, feels full.
And part of that is, it depends on what's in your salad already.
Right. Yeah. So on that note of composition, Yarrow Willard, I don't know if he learned this from you or maybe it was his dad Terry. Remember him years ago told me how he kind of thinks about formulas, less notes, but more of like a tribe. So he thinks about, okay, I need to have my chief herb, I need to have my warrior herb and my soothsayer herb, and another totally different analogy, he thinks about like ginger as like the taxi driver, that circulatory stimulant, like help get things where it needs to go. Do you have anything? Maybe it's outside of the kind of the music analogy, but thoughts on that?
Still on that stream of thought, I guess, is that like we would have this little formula of R equals E times C. Okay. Results come as a combination of effectiveness and compliance.
Yeah.
And if I mix up a herbal blend for somebody and they taste it and just go, "You've got to be kidding." And even if they buy it, it's going to go home and sit in a drawer.
Yeah.
So there will be no results.
Right.
So we have to find a way with the physical body remedies to find something that's compliant enough that they're going to taste okay.
Yeah.
So we've got the strong herbs we want them to take, but how do we stretch this now?
Right.
Into some, do we just add some honey, or what do we do so that they'll take it?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And the same thing happens with, like in my classes when I was talking about oils and how I don't like this whole notes concept. I would teach the notes theory because it has its place.
Yeah.
But we can bring in taste, as I just did. But it occurred to me one day that notes are different vibrations hitting your ears, and they can be short, like that's the top notes we talk about,
Right.
high frequency stuff with smell, or waves that are this big,
Yeah.
like that's reishi, you know,
Right.
going by, right? So if you're making a blend just for relaxation, and you're starting with stuff like reishi, which is not aromatics now, right? But why would you feel the need to add top notes?
Right.
Because that's just going to screw it up. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
bassy blend.
Right.
So, but that got me just thinking about wavelengths and how, like, a lot of people thought I was an idiot to put my canoe in the ocean. But I would have to say, well, I've grown up on lakes that storms can come up faster than they do out here. I've seen this water with 14-foot waves on it,
Right.
but that took a day to build up. So you can be out on the ocean in swells that are 12 feet high, but they're 300 yards across.
Right.
You're just slowly going up and down, and if you were in another canoe over there, I wouldn't see you for a moment.
Right.
And then, oh, there's Malcolm. Are we going to catch anything yet? You know, like, so that's not threatening,
Right.
you know. But where are you going, shopping at midnight while they're open? Never mind. Hey, would you pick up 6 of those yellow ones? You know, that's high frequency, right? Or in a traffic jam, or, you know.
Yeah.
And that's when your brain waves look like this, right? So when we're just good, normal people, we're in, I think, beta state, or is it the other way around? Alpha and beta.
Right.
I forget which.
Yeah, I'd have to look again.
But just decent people are in the like 4 to 7 sort of frequencies. And then if you smell something that's kind of, oh, isn't that beautiful? It's exciting. Or people are honking horns at you or whatever, then you're up into the 25 to 50 range. But you can get into when it's like this, and that's when a lot of people would have a headache by now, or you know,
Right.
you're going to drop something or whatever. Or when we take things that are, like I was saying, whether you smell it or eat it, that have this really, it's not even per second anymore, it's 4 seconds per wave. Like
Right.
there's things that are that, you know, you have a wave that's this long.
Yeah. Right.
So in perfumery, that's where all this notes theory comes from,
Yeah.
because the other word for base notes is fixatives. If you blend something together and it's just really nice, it's lovely, it's, you know, maybe you've got something like jasmine, which is really nice on its own. But when I made a blend called Jasmine Delight, I found that a little bit of ginger with it
Right.
really put a little snap into it. It made it, oh,
Yeah.
that's really lovely, you know. So
Yeah.
it depends whether you're working with, but it got me thinking about, back to music. If somebody's out of tune, some bands today that want to be that way, they actually intentionally don't tune their guitars, I think. You know,
Right.
it just, that's a new sound.
Yeah.
Something that I don't understand that. But it's, whether it's music, and that's why we have the notes, or colors. Like you might do something with your kitchen with, it's that I never would have thought of, where you've got this brick color and then a bright red stripe going through it, that maybe an interior designer did for you, and you paid them $400 for that collection. And I'm too cheap to hire a designer, and I don't want to just copycat you, but I want to do something similar. So I do that with a bright stripe through the middle and some color here and some other color here, and go out and buy my paints or my tiles or whatever. And it almost gives you a headache when you walk in the kitchen.
Right.
Because it's out of tune.
Right.
So
yeah.
it can happen with colors. It can happen with music.
Yeah.
It can happen with, what was the movie called? The Perfect Storm.
Right.
So you can set up, I don't know if you did this, I remember physics in high school, we had these little vibrating things, so you set up waves in a little tank. We had these kind of like metal trays about this inch deep, and a little thing that would vibrate, and you could set up like a wave.
Yeah.
So we've got the wave ponds now that people go to, right? The wave,
Right.
you go in,
Yeah.
play in the waves. So you can have waves that are fairly large, and your boat comes up and down nice and gently, and that's okay. But if they're a little bigger, you have to kind of learn to steer in and out of them, which is called tacking a little bit. But if you have the wind coming from two different directions, and there's waves coming one way and from another way, they're not waves anymore, that's chop.
Right.
And they're little triangular shaped things, and you can't really steer right any which way. And that's what the perfect wave was about in that movie, was they had two big windstorms happening in two different directions, and there's
Right.
just no proper way to steer the boat, and you just crash.
Yeah.
Right? So whether it's physically something like water, and you're in it, or you're going to smell it, or you're just going to see it, and it's either really lovely or it makes your eyes bleed, we're still talking notes,
Yeah.
or it's about waves.
Yeah.
So I kind of relaxed about that whole calling oils notes.
Right.
Once I kind of clicked in on that theme.
Yeah. And I'm sure that there's got correlation in terms of, like you say, everything is frequency, which is waves, like cycles. And on, kind of large, kind of macro, you mentioned like, okay, like, low notes, like it's a lower frequency. If you go lower than that, then you, from sound, you slow it down enough, you begin to hear it or feel it as like a pulse. You could slow that, down even further from like 60 beats a minute to, okay, well, a year, or a moon cycle, like those are frequencies.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and then, so let's say the moon cycle or the solar cycle, sped up, you can be on the same frequency of it, and you hear it as a certain like pulse. You increase it even further, like to the point where it's like you can't hear it anymore, now you see it. And then there's the spectrum of frequencies of all the colors. And that's why, and then you can take it from like, visible light spectrum to, rays and gamma frequencies and all that kind of stuff. Like it's all, there's a connection, between, colors and notes. And
I never quite thought of that, and with what you just said about moon cycle,
right.
which clearly affects us,
Yeah.
that even something you're taking for a physical ailment, maybe the dosage should fit in with the moon cycle.
Right.
Where your dosage is 3 a day during that part of the calendar, and it's 10 a day at a different part of the calendar, sort of thing.
Right.
I never thought about that.
Yeah. And coming back to kind of ancient, traditions, people have been trying to map that out for a long time, get in line with...
Is this okay?
Yeah, the moon, the solar cycles. Yeah.
All right.
Oh, yeah. All good.
Hello. Hello, little black box.
All right. Well, we've had a good conversation, covered some ground.
And some air.
And some air. Yeah. Well, that'll be fun. I was just before we hit record, I was like, well, maybe we could riff on that idea, the connection between herbalism and music. So there you are. If you've enjoyed this, yeah, give it a little thumbs up, share it out.
I'm just thinking that's why I like CKUA, because just in the time it takes to shave, they might go from some jazz to Jimi Hendrix to a classical thing, and I like the eclecticism
Right.
of that.
Yeah.
During the course of a day, you can go from being really sad, and then somebody tells you a joke, or you might just see a child run by they're just so cute with their red hair and freckles in the sunshine.
Yeah.
That there's nobody around, but they make you giggle.
Yeah.
Right?
Speaking of jokes, here's my latest one. Came up with this one last night. Why did the two Haifa get into an argument?
The two Haifa.
Yeah. Hyphae is in like fungal. So this is the thing about my jokes. You gotta have to either be a herbalist or something about
Some background.
yeah. Okay. Well, I won't preface it any further. So why did the two Haifa get into an argument?
I have no idea.
Because one said to the other, "Hey, that's my psyllium."
That's just silly, period. But on that note of needing some background,
Yeah.
two atoms were walking out of, this is those sort of bar jokes that go real quick.
Right.
Two atoms walking out of a bar, and one said, "Oh dear, I've lost my electron." "Are you sure?" "Yes, I'm positive." It was two hydrogen atoms, that was it.
Okay.
Yeah, two hydrogen atoms.
Cool.
Or my all-time favorite was two antennae met in a bar, fell in love, and got married. The ceremony wasn't much, but the reception was excellent.
There we go. Cool. What does club moss and a public speaker have in common?
Well, I could think about our prime minister in answering that.
It could be any public speaker. So club moss and a
Club moss.
public speaker. They both like a podium.
That's very good. But you definitely need some mycology background to get that one.
Yeah, there we are. Yeah, all my jokes.
Well,
are
we'll
like
end on those goofy notes.
that. All right. Till next time.
Ciao.